Hello all, and thank you all for joining us this evening for a very important talk about colonization and what it means in the context of Israel, Palestine and Canada. My name is Ala Hamdan and I am a representative of Solidarity for Palestinian Human Rights, which is a University of Calgary club. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 7 territory, and we're honored to have William Singer, one of our speakers, who is from the Blood Reserve from Treaty 7 territory. I'd like to do a few thank yous to start with, and the first thank you goes to Brian Seaman, who was the mastermind behind this event coming together. And the second person is our moderator, Saima Jamal. I'd also like to thank Justice for Palestinians for co-hosting this event, and lastly, Solidarity for Palestinian Human Rights, the Calgary chapter at the University of Calgary. I'd just like to make a quick note that no recording of the event will be allowed because we are recording the event ourselves, and we will be posting it on the Facebook page when the event is over. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about SPHR at U of C and what they do. We're a nonprofit organization that's student-based that advocates on a strong social justice platform to uphold the rights of the Palestinian people in the face of human rights violations on all forms of racism, discrimination, misinformation, and misrepresentation. The overall objectives of SPHR are to represent Palestine and introduce the rich Palestinian culture to the North American community. Also, we like to educate the North American community by a variety of means on the struggle of the Palestinian people. And lastly, we combat all forms of racism, including anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and to advocate that the struggle of the Palestinian people is not a struggle against the Jewish people or the Jewish religion, but a rather a struggle for the legitimacy of the Palestinian identity and Palestinian rights. SPHR hosts many events on campus, such as movie screenings, hosting prominent speakers like the ones we have tonight, culture nights, and much more. If you'd like to know more about SPHR, please sign up at our sheet outside at our table, or you can ask any of our members outside about the club, and you can also visit us on Facebook and Twitter at SPHR Calgary. I'm going to turn it over to Brian.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for that kind introduction, Ala. I don't know about being the mastermind. That almost makes me sound sinister. So good evening, folks. Thanks for coming out. My name is Brian Seaman, and I am a human rights and civil liberties advocate, public speaker, and writer here in Calgary. And the impetus for tonight's event, it came to me this way. The term settler, it almost carries a benign connotation, and when we look at what's taken place in the occupied territories, that settlement, those settlers, they're anything but a benign presence. People are being forcibly driven from their homes and from their land. But I think more importantly, I want to stress that as a Canadian of European ancestry who was born here, as many of us who were born here of European ancestry must acknowledge that the settlement that occurred in this land and in the United States and throughout the Americas generally was anything but benign. There were First Peoples here. There were millions of them. A conservative estimate places 50 million Indigenous peoples in the Americas prior to colonization. I know that it makes a lot of non-Indigenous Canadians upset. They feel uncomfortable with this notion of facing the reality of our own history. So I was inspired to bring together people of Palestinian ancestry and a man who claims lineage from the first occupants of this land to compare and to hear their stories of oppression. I am also a member of a community group called the Justice for Palestinians. It is a community group of people from various walks of life, some Palestinian, most are not Palestinian. And our role is to advocate for human rights and justice. I know that there are people who say, you know, we need to fight for land. And there are people who say that there are people who are more entitled to land because of primacy of occupancy. The point is, whether you came to this land 50 years ago or your ancestors came here 500 years ago or 5,000 years ago, we need to work together and we need to share the land. And indeed, the treaties that were signed with the First Nations peoples and the Treaty 7 that was signed with the people of this area, it was to share the land and to share the resources. And what's taken place since these treaties were signed is anything but sharing. It's exploitation and genocide by another name. One final thing before I pass things over to my dear friend Saima Jamal, who's going to be the moderator of tonight's event, is to remind people that if you've not yet heard, the University of Calgary Faculty of Law is hosting a very important talk at noon on Tuesday, next Tuesday. They're bringing Professor Robert Wintemut, who's a United Kingdom professor from the United Kingdom. He's a human rights lawyer, and he received his law degree actually from the University of Alberta. And he's going to be speaking at noon next Tuesday on the topic Israel-Palestine through the lens of racial discrimination law. Is the analogy with South African apartheid valid? This is a free event. However, I urge you, if you are interested in coming to this event, to go to the University of Calgary events page and pre-register, because the room will fill up. So, without further ado, it's my absolute pleasure, as it always is, to introduce Saima Jamal, a dear friend of mine, and an ally and a supporter who supported me in a difficult situation that occurred last year. And Saima is going to be the moderator for tonight's evening. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Saima Jamal.
Thank you. I'll just walk around and talk. I think we need a little bit of fluidity today. You know, Brian Seaman, who's sitting here, he's telling me that he gave me this grand introduction. Thank you, Brian, for that. But you have to understand the kind of person Brian is as well. Brian, I've known him for now almost 4 years, and he's not just an articulate thinker. The way Brian just frames all his arguments on anything, it's something that you want to come and actually pick his brains about as well. I involved Brian in the whole Israel-Palestine issue when I first met him, and since then he's become one of the staunchest allies that we have. And for that, I'm very grateful to have Brian in our community and in this discussion, and to actually start discussion in this specific subject matter today. You know, whenever we have talks on Israel-Palestine, I've been hosting these for the last 5 years, I've been moderating them. A lot of the times, this is so close to a lot of our hearts that we just hang on every word that comes out of the speakers. A lot of them are controversial. A lot of them are things that you will agree with. But what I want you to really focus is respect. This is not a debate of any sort. This is a dialogue. So in a dialogue, we're always trying to come to a collaborative way to, you know, think about what we're discussing here. So you won't have any chance for question and answers right after each speaker speaks, but we'll have 10 minutes where we'll go through each speaker, and we'll finish up with Miriam here. We'll start with Anthony. Each of them will get 10 minutes, and after they're done, we'll open up the podium for Q&A. Q&A will be for 20 minutes, and then after that, we'll end the event, but you'll have a lot of chance if you want to actually come and talk to them personally, because I know a lot of times not everyone feels comfortable just going up and asking questions. You're more than welcome to do that. So with that, I will start the actual intros. We have today 4 amazing speakers for you. We have Dr. Anthony Hall, who's a professor of global studies at the University of Lethbridge. We have Hadil Kazaz, who's the program director at Integrity Action. We have William Singer of the Blood Tribe. And we have Miriam Ware, peace activist and a supporter and ally of the I Don't Know More movement. So each of them are going to focus on things that I will be introducing as I introduce each person individually. So with that, let's talk a little bit more about our first speaker. Anthony Hall, other than being the professor of global studies at the University of Lethbridge, he was also a professor at Sudbury at the Department of Native Indian Studies. He was in Lethbridge? Okay, in Lethbridge, right. Okay, he's also written a book called Earth into Property, describing the disastrous effects of capitalism of the indigenous peoples. But the most interesting part about Anthony, I don't know how many of you guys were actually into these sort of things way back in 2009 when Anthony, with our friend Splitting the Sky, also known as John Boncourt, tried to arrest George Bush when he came in Calgary in 2009. So yes, that's Anthony. So with that, Anthony, welcome.
Yeah, that was quite exciting in Calgary life. Cynthia McKinney came in for the trial, and also Ramsey Clark, the former Attorney General of the United States. It was a time to remember, as is this occasion. This is a very important assembly. I've been waiting a long time to hear this question, to have a venue to see this question addressed directly. Indigenous peoples in Palestine, Israel, and Indigenous peoples in Canada. And I think the timing of this event, several weeks only after the amazing speech of the Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper, in the Knesset, the Israeli Knesset in Israel, that was an astonishing event to me. The prelude was astonishing, seeing the Prime Minister of Canada serenading the Jewish National Fund and making very expansive statements. So I think now that our government, the Government of Canada, has declared, the head of the government has declared that Israel is our best friend and we're partners with Israel in the most intimate possible way. I think that is a real opening to say, okay, well, there's quite a bit we share in common. Our identity as settler states and the fact that the lands on which both our countries are situated are the property of the Indigenous peoples, are the heritage and inheritance of the Indigenous peoples. And of course, during that speech, a quite incredible incident took place where Abu Arar and Ahmed Tibi walked out in the midst of Harper's presentation. So the discussion was about BDS, it was about apartheid, coming from the Arab members' seats, came expressions about the settlements, and of course the Arab members of the Knesset, the Palestinian members of the Knesset walked out. And then Bibi, Benjamin Netanyahu, stood and began clapping, and the entire floor in the Knesset, the people stood up and began clapping, and quite extraordinarily, Stephen Harper had brought over 200 people with him. I guess many of those people with dual Israeli-Canadian citizenship, and of course the spectators gallery stood up. And so how do we interpret that moment? What was the applause for? What was the standing ovation for? My interpretation was that there was an expression of, way to go, Stephen. You know, you've taken such a strong stand and offended the Palestinian members of the Knesset that they've walked out and you've stood your ground. Good for you, you've stood your ground. And in that moment, seeing those left behind in the Knesset with their applause, their standing ovation, it seemed to me that this was a symbol of the continuity of this imperial heritage. We could take it back to 1492. We could talk about the British Empire, the French Empire, the Belgian Empire, the Portuguese Empire. And now in Jerusalem, in the Knesset, it seems this inheritance of imperial rule and imperial control by a very small group in a metropolis, a new metropolis of imperialism, Jerusalem, that this was being expressed, and that although there were only 2 individuals leaving the Knesset dark-skinned people, Indigenous peoples. Those two people were, in a sense, representatives of the largest constituency on planet Earth. The largest constituency, of course, being the Indigenous peoples, who experienced colonization as a force coming at those populations. So this seemed to clarify where Canada now stands at the pinnacle of this imperial trajectory inherited from history. And so this term apartheid, of course, it's very provocative. It's very powerful, and it effectively does connote an inheritance from history. Now, in working on these two works, this Earth into Property was mentioned, and the prior book, these are a 2-volume work, The American Empire and the Fourth World. In the research in Ottawa, I was able to locate 3 files of communications between something called the Department of Native Affairs in the white minority regime of South Africa and the Canadian Department of Indian Affairs. And the correspondence I was able to view covered a period from the late 1940s to the early 1960s. And the Department of Native Affairs in South Africa and the Department of Indian Affairs in Canada, they saw themselves as colleagues. They saw their duties as very similar. They shared notes. They were both interested in something they called native self-government, a term that we will still hear. And so this legacy of apartheid, Canada has a big role in that. And so in seeing this latest round of apartheid, I guess whose most profound symbol is the wall, the separation wall, or some would call it the apartheid wall. We're looking at a long continuity, and we need to be aware of how important Canada has been in the history of apartheid. Canada had a big role in helping to instruct the South African government on pass laws. It's not that long ago that to leave the reserves in Canada was illegal unless you had a pass from the Indian agent on each reserve. So 10 minutes, I must be about 5 minutes into it. My main introductory comment, I want to just tell an anecdote which was instructive to me. So this work, it was recognized in the Independent in the United Kingdom as one of the best history books in 2010. And I was hoping to get a little bit of attention for it in Canada. And a colleague pointed me at a book promoter by the name of David Litvik. And I met with him in Vancouver. And he was initially very enthusiastic about promoting the book. But then he came across a paragraph. So in this discussion, which had as its, he had said, well, I can get you into the Vancouver Public Library, Portland, Victoria. He was talking about his specialty being the area of Cascadia. And I was anxious to do that. But then he, a couple of weeks later, contacted me and said, well, I read a paragraph here, and I'm Jewish, and I'm a very great supporter of the State of Israel, and I really can't, in good conscience, promote this work. And so I'll just read, it's just a short paragraph. I don't think it's anything remarkable. I think it's kind of almost the obvious. But I write on page 10 of Earth into Property, in the transition to the new forms of imperial globalization, I talk about imperial globalization and then anti-imperial globalization, the fact that those fighting imperial globalization or opposing it or resisting it have to form larger and larger coalitions. So that would be a form of anti-imperial globalization. But in the transition to the new forms of imperial globalization, the plight of the displaced and stateless Palestinians has provided a lightning rod and proxy for the grievance of colonized peoples the world over. most peoples in the world have experienced colonization as a force coming at them. I believe Palestinians have become a kind of proxy that people see their own history reflected in the history of the Palestinians. It's over a short period of time, especially since 1948. Here it's a longer period of time. Many of colonialism's core attributes have been replicated and extended in the imposition, beginning in 1947, of the Jewish state on the ancestral land of the Palestinians. The territory where Palestine and Israel overlap is situated on the eastern shores of the Mediterranean Sea, a strategic point of convergence between Europe, Asia, and Africa. The indigenous peoples of Palestine never consented to bear the huge human costs resulting from the international recognition of the sovereign Israeli state. This recognition was extended by some governments as an act of atonement for the long heritage of crimes against European Jewry, which culminated in the horrors of the Nazi Holocaust. So this topic, these parallels, these similarities, it's necessary that we talk about it. And I resent the fact that I can't see this subject explored fairly equitably on, for instance, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, let alone the private media. So I thank the organizers of this event. I think this is a very rich subject, and I'm pleased and honored to be part of this discussion.
Thank you, Anthony. I just want everyone to make sure that you're actually taking notes. So if you have questions to ask, I know after 4 speakers you'll probably forget what Anthony had said. So make sure you have your questions ready for Anthony when we're done. So our next speaker is Hadil Kazaz. Hadil is the program director at Integrity Action. Hadil is born in the Shati refugee camp in the Gaza Strip. She's a specialist in gender and development studies. Hadil has contributed to the first Palestinian Human Development Report, the Palestinian National Poverty Report, and the Palestinian Time Use Survey, along with reports on the right to education. Today, Hadil will be talking about systematic discrimination and how individuals and groups become victims of systems even if their awareness changes. So she'll be discussing examples of this sort of systematic discrimination in the Palestinian context. So with that, welcome Hadil.
So good evening, everybody. And thanks for Justice for Palestinians and SPHR for having this discussion. Actually, this discussion has been in my mind since the time I came to Canada, almost 20 months ago. Suddenly, I realized I am becoming a settler for the first time in my life, and this was really bothering me. The question kept coming and going in my mind, am I actually becoming a settler, something which I fight against all my life, which I don't want for my country, or is there something else that is happening? A story which I hold from my early childhood is the story of my grandma, Samir, who actually, she had a Jewish neighbor who lived next to her in her town in Jaffa, which is becoming Jaffa now. And my grandmother was known for special type of care for children. And whenever people will ask her, where did you learn that? How did you know how to do that? My grandmother would say, I learned it from my Jewish neighbor. We were very good friends. We were very close. So the journey between the story of my grandmother and my childhood, of where people were living together and sharing the land, really living together without any problem, to the settlers as the symbols of aggression and harassment and annoying everybody and actually capturing more and more land and actually making Palestine disappear, as maybe most of you are aware of this map. I don't know how much do you know about Palestine. Can you raise your hand if you think that you know a little bit about Palestine and Palestine-Israel context? Okay, great. So actually, what the question which links the two stories, how I'm becoming a settler to the story of my grandmother living side by side with her Jewish neighbor is actually the story of Palestine disappearing, piece by piece. And in my journey of thinking in the last 20 months, I questioned how this is happening. What makes this happen, actually? And my simple answer, and I'm happy to be challenged in that, I think there is systematic change which is happening. And systems are influencing people, influencing the way people are thinking, the way people are behaving, including the settlers who are shooting around the West Bank, including the freedom fighters everywhere, including the peace activists everywhere. So, what are these systems and how are these systems are affecting people? I think systems are actually made generally by the white, able-bodied man. And I'm happy for you to challenge this as a woman of color. I think I'm still able-bodied until now. I don't know until when. But basically, this issue of how the systems are made, legal systems, education systems, health systems, systems of land confiscation, systems of army and militarization, systems of how roads are designed, how people are moving around the different places, how people are cantonized into places, to the degree that for 8 years before coming to Canada, I couldn't see my family in the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip is closer to Ramallah, where I used to live, than Canmore is to Calgary. It's 80 kilometers. But because of the systematic discrimination and isolation and segregation, I had no access whatsoever to the Gaza Strip for 8 years. I couldn't see my siblings, my parents, my mother for 8 years. Systems and people is the question for me, and at the same time it's the answer. It's a question because people are products of systems. All of us are. We are products of the education system we are subjected to the legal system we are ruled by, to the political system we are governed with, and at the same time, we are the people who make the systems. And this is a paradox. This is exactly the answer for what I think is my question. If systems are made and people are products of systems and at the same time are made to be victims of these systems, they can also be the solution. They can be the people who can change this. What surprised me while preparing for this, I actually tried to organize my ideas, and I wanted to give you some indications and some numbers and the statistics of how people are victimized. But then, Palestinians are victimized. But then I thought, okay, I'm falling again in the same trap. Is killing one body, one person, or killing 1,000 persons not the same? For me, I think it's the same. It doesn't matter. So I don't want to fall into the trap of saying this number of Palestinians were killed and this number of Israelis were killed. This is not the issue. The issue is how the systems made people actually in both sides killing each other, hating each other, and not understanding each other's stories, not understanding each other's narratives, not even open enough to understand these different narratives. So I was looking at how Israelis think of their state. And there is a public opinion poll which was published recently, and actually it is on SPHR Facebook page if you want to visit that Facebook page. It tells that 95% of Israelis actually think that their state is discriminating. It has discrimination against different citizens. So I digged a little bit more, and in fact that's true. There are at least 9 or 10 actually different categories of residents, of citizens, of people who live in what's so-called Israel-Palestine. And if you look where I come from, I come at the bottom of the ladder. I am a Gazan, which means I have a special color of ID, a special rights of movement, a special restriction of what I can and cannot do. The same thing happens to Ethiopians who, Jewish Ethiopians who immigrated to Israel. The same things happens to Ashkenazim and Sfardim and others. I will not talk about this because I will leave this for my colleague and friend Mariam to talk more about discrimination inside Israel. What I want to talk about is how these systems actually gradually made the disappearing of Palestine happening through different mechanisms, different legal systems, and that was the first thing. So the Israelis allowed the legal systems which were governing the civil life of Palestinians to continue as they are in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. So the West Bank was governed by Jordanians before 1967. The Gaza Strip was governed by Egyptians before 1967. So they kept these civil laws in place. But on top of these civil laws, there are what's so-called military orders. Military orders are issued by the military, not by a legal system, civil legal system as such. It allowed confiscation of land. It allowed prevention of family reunification. It allowed considering Palestinians as absentees and not allowing them to gain access to their land, to their homes, to where they have been expelled from. The land confiscation orders comes by military orders. The prevention of coming back or family reunification is done through that. This was the land, the people. So different types of military orders, of legal systems, of arbitrary arrestation and detention, of administrative detention, of expelling of some kind of different activists from Palestine was actually emptying the land of its people. So without having access to the land, without having the people who are living on this land, what is left? Very small enclaved, controlled by numbers. A, B, C. A is controlled by the Palestinians. B is controlled by the Palestinians, but with Israeli access to security. So Israelis can come in and out from these enclaves at any time. And C, where the Israelis have complete control. So during this time, it means that more and more authorities is shrinking. Then you hear all the time about peace negotiations, and there is talks about solutions, and the Palestinians are refusing these solutions. And then you look at the map, and the map doesn't exist. You look at what is offered, it's nothing, basically nothing. And you hear that only in 2013, which is last year, shocking numbers of how much land was confiscated from Area B and Area C. So basically, Palestinians are not only having no control so far, but losing the little control they have. I want to conclude here by saying, what can we do? And why I think systems and understanding systems is the most important thing. I think it's the most important thing because basically it's in our hand to reshape the systems. How? By understanding how they are done, by understanding and standing up here in Canada as well as in Palestine and Israel, everywhere, understanding how bills are passing, laws and regulations are passing, who is doing them, how we can vote sensibly to choose the government that represents us, how we can actually educate ourselves and get access to alternative education and not be victims of the mainstream propaganda, which actually shaping our thinking in a certain direction. And there are different ways and means to get this access to this alternative education. Being part of the groups like Justice for Palestinians and SPHR is one of them. Actually checking in the internet for more information is part of it. So I encourage you all to stand up for the systems. Thank you.
Thanks, Hadil. Hadil talked about reshaping our systems. So one thing I just want you guys to also remember is just look at the diversity of the background of people that we brought together here today. You know, we've got an academic, we've got a Palestinian, we've got a native person, and we've got also a person of Jewish background. Just bringing all these people together, it's a tough job. You know, Brian did it. He, thank God, masterminded it and put it all together.
Make me sound like an evil genius. I'm sorry.
With that, you know, take advantage again of what you're going to hear from here, and then come back and ask them questions. So with that, let's start going to the next person. And it's going to be a little tough one for me because I'm going to pronounce his full name. So let me introduce to you William Singer. His name is Api Sumaka, which means running coyote. He's a full-blooded member of the blood tribe Kainai of the Blackfoot Confederacy. He's an artist, a historian, a researcher, an entrepreneur, communications consultant, activist, and a musician. So he is an advocate for the First Nations right, and is currently one of the organizers of the Idle No More Blood Tribe chapter. And he's also a member of the American Indian movement. And what William is going to talk to you about is, as a First Nations person of this land, is he'll focus on the experience of colonization through the residential school, through religion, through racism, and the environment. And it's especially relevant now because if anybody knows what's happening in Edmonton for the last couple of days, and it's still continuing now with the Truth and Reconciliation, this is very important to hear what William has to say. He'll also focus on having witnessed the loss of culture and language through forced assimilation. The Blackfoot worldviews continues through technology and the progress of this country. So with that, I'd like to welcome William Singer. William?
Okay. It's good to see all of you here today. And just to remind you, Oki is our greeting for hello. So I would say Oki, Tsanitapi, and you would say Ik Sukapi. Okay, let's try it. Okay. Oki, Tsanitapi. Ik Sukapi. Sukapi. Well, I'm a product of the residential school system, and when I was asked to speak, there was a lot of things going through my mind in regards to the topic I should choose, because with the previous talk, I'll bring up a lot of the same parallels that I myself face and my people face living here on my own territory. For instance, I cannot move freely from country to country. I have to have a card that states I'm a member of my tribe. I'm given a number. I have to show this card when I go to the U.S. border. But no, they take me inside into a room and they question me, all kinds of things. Why am I going down? What am I going to do in the U.S.? So a lot of times I have to cross the U.S. border in braids, or I'd have to put my hair back to look, I guess, respectable to them. No, in reality, a person, like with myself, I wear my hair the way my warrior brothers wore their hair back 200-300 years ago. And this is what I chose to represent myself as that. But to a lot of people, there's a hidden meaning, means that I'm going to do something wrong. I'm a terrorist. I've been told that. It's strange how other places in this world are almost exactly the same with what I'm going through. For instance, our territory. Our territory was north, from the North Saskatchewan River down to the Yellowstone River in Montana. It bordered the Rocky Mountains, and it went into the middle of Saskatchewan. So I have a map here that I drew of my territory at one time, which I was if I was alive, then I'd be free to walk this. Today, this is all we have. A reserve. This reserve is just a little speck right here. And at one time, my grandparents weren't allowed to leave the reserve. We had to have a permit to go buy the things that we needed. Now the same thing is happening. I can't go visit my relatives in the U.S. because the Blackfoot, the Confederacy, goes right into Montana. They can't come as well unless we get questioned and harassed. So I'll talk a little bit about my experiences in the system that I had no choice to live under. I was a free person at one time. When I was in my first 4 years of growing up, I would say I was free. Then I was put into a boarding school, a residential school. I spent 7 years in 2 residential schools on my reserve, the blood reserve. 7 years of my life was spent there. What I thought was going to be a good experience, according to my friends and some of the, I guess the religious, the clergy that were there, who said that this is the best for you. You'll learn new things. You'll be able to walk the path of righteousness to salvation, because you're walking a path to damnation. So I did my time at residential school, and I was one of the first students who had started experimenting with assimilation. We were trucked off into schools in the neighboring towns. So the first year I went as an assimilated student. I was in a room with all of my people. We're all from the reserve. The second year there was a few non-natives. The third year it was all mixed. By the time I was in grade 6, there was very few of us in the classroom. But from that first day I started school, I must have fought everyone in class that day, because a lot of people didn't know that I was still around, that the Indians were still around. A lot of them thought we were gone. So I had to prove myself and say, no, I belong here. This is where I'm from. So I'll go back to those two paths. I start thinking about them in my teen years. Salvation, damnation. I chose damnation because damnation was told to me. That was my history, because I didn't believe in a God. My worshipings were all pagan. So I started really thinking about that. Salvation or damnation. I chose damnation, and I'm still on that road. For me, it's not a negative tag. It's not a negative word for me, because according to the nuns and the priests, my history, my culture, my way of life, they called it damnation. So I hung on to it. I began to realize I need to be back to what I used to be, back to when my first 4 years of life I was free. If I can't have that, I'll work best in my mind, with my body, to free myself from that. So I began to decolonize my mind. Little by little, I started taking things out, only to realize I was just one of the very few who were doing that. A lot of my people are really heavily colonized. Their way of thinking is very different from what I think. I don't speak for myself, there's others. We're going back to our ways, our history, knowing who we are, where we came from. So the parallels in the Middle East and from where I'm from here, they're very much the same. We have a government here who wants to do away with me and my people. They want to take away our status and be regular Canadians. The time we signed the treaties, a peace treaty to share the land, that was the understanding of that. It wasn't a treaty to surrender our land. But it's not like that. So this is where a lot of the same thing, the parallels are happening with us. Our land base has shrunk. So going back to finding out who I am and to walk the path of the damnation righteousness that I've always held inside me is to lead other people, to wake others up. We're a part of this land. We're not these people that are in the corner or shadows. There's others that are having the same struggle as we are. And that struggle, if we can pull together, look what can be done. So it was really hard for me to, even now, to speak about a lot of what's happening, because right now in Edmonton, they're having a Truth and Reconciliation. The commission, this is his last one. For me, I have moved on from the residential schools. I've taken all of the stuff that I was affected by it, and I'm using it. I'm using it for the greater good. I'm using it as my power to heal, to help others, native or non-native, to understand the truth and the power we have as a people to rise up against oppression. I never thought I would ever see that day where I'd be standing on a road holding a sign, fighting for my rights. Never thought I'd see that day. I thought it'd be my son's time, but no. So I just want to end off and let you know of who I am, where I come from, and what it is to be nisto, me, in this world, to walk this path. But you know, I enjoy every day. I enjoy every day I wake up. I give thanks to the Creator. I give thanks for the things that are going to happen to me today, like even for now, meeting all of you, being able to share our experiences, these speakers, their experiences, because it's important. It's important to know who we are. So I'll just leave you with one, a comment I always have that I share with a lot of people, is that a friend of mine, the late Everett Soup, once told me, "Miss Scunny, my brother, whatever you do in life, do it. And let's make this place a beautiful world to live in." Thank you.
Every time you hear stories from the Indigenous people of this country, every time you hear stories from the Palestinian, it touches my heart so much that this goes on and on for days, and it's not just about reflecting. And I know you'll come here and you'll reflect, you'll ask questions, but I also want you, after you finish here, try to pursue something in this area. Now that your interest, your thirst for learning more in this subject area, I'm hoping that it'll get peaked a little bit after this event. Approach one of us. We're involved with a lot of projects we're working in this field, so we can involve you in there. If you want to do some practical work in these sort of fields, approach all of these people, including myself and Brian. The next speaker that we have is Mariam Mayer. Mariam is a peace activist and supporter, ally of the grassroots Indigenous rights movement, also known as the I Don't Know More. She's a trained nurse who, though currently a resident of Calgary, has worked as a humanitarian worker with Palestinian children and young people in Israel who are from the occupied territories. Among other humanitarian efforts, she's a coordinator of Operation Solomon. It's a rescue airlift operation that brought Ethiopian Jews to Israel. One thing I want you all to realize that it is hard from the Jewish community to actually come and speak in this sort of events. In fact, there's only 2 people that belong to the independent Jewish voices that are in Calgary that actually speak out. So for me, Miriam is a real gem to have in this sort of discussion. So with that, let's welcome Miriam.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you, everybody, for being here to listen to us. My name's Miriam, but also Mariam in Arabic, and I'm glad I have such an interchangeable name so I can relate to everybody. I'm not really a representative or a person from the Jewish community. I belong to the organization here, Justice for Palestine, and just to explain, most of the people in the main Jewish community are very conservative. They all back Stephen Harper, and they all back the Jewish National Fund and all the things that they represent, and are very pro-Israel. So I get a lot of flack from them, and I think they probably would not appreciate what I'm going to say. But anyway, I appreciate what I said. I was a foreign Zionist at one time. I went to live in Israel to help out the great country there, but I had to, just by some kind of godsend, I'd say, I had got a job working with the Palestinian children in a facility. It was a rehabilitation facility just outside of Jerusalem, and we had a mixed staff there of Palestinians and Israelis, and most of the children came from very dire circumstances in the occupied territories. And in the facility, it was equal, and everybody respected everybody else. But I began to realize when I visited the people in the Palestinian homes, they were warm and hospitable and kind, but they were discriminated against. And I began to realize there's something wrong with these policies and it's a deal called systems. And it's unfortunate, but when I'm asked whether I'll go visit Israel, I'll say when they tear down the apartheid wall, when they return the land to the Palestinians that they rightly deserve, and when they treat everybody with equal respect and humanity. So that'll be a while yet. I'm working on it, though. Anyway, I mainly wanted to focus on the children because in both circumstances they're the ones that were recipients of the things that are going on. When you think of it, we often say in Idle No More, when we're talking about the land and the treaties, we have to think of the grandparents and the great-grandparents and also the children that come along and the grandchildren, because they're the ones that are going to be here after it's all done. Well, in Israel, the children in the schools are taught, and even before they get there, about the great national pride, and it's nice to be proud of your country, but a whole system or a whole development has happened, and it wasn't just overnight. They came in there because it was supposed to be a refuge for Jewish people after the Holocaust, after the war, there were a lot of people came there. A lot of people went to America and Canada as well, mostly United States. But unfortunately, it has turned into a military occupation kind of a place, and it gets worse because they have infringed on the Palestinian territory, and I've seen the results of that. There's that they call refugee camps. Well, I don't think any of you people have seen them. They certainly aren't Palm Beach or anything. They're concrete jungles. There's one called Dahesha, which is right in the middle of Israel, and it's 1 square kilometer with at least 40,000 people living in it. The children play with whatever they can find on the streets, and the biggest problem there is that they have no freedom. William was talking about the freedom on the reservations and not being permitted to go anywhere. These children and families can't go anywhere. And in Gaza, it's even worse, because now they're blockaded by the Egyptians on one side and the Israelis on the other side. And the checkpoints, it's like a disgrace. To have people go through there is a disgrace. Really, it's a humiliation. And the main part about colonization is dehumanization. You're not a person anymore. They taught people in residential schools, you're not a person. You've got to change to be like us, because we find you dangerous or different. And the same has happened with the Palestinians. They had that land, and they're treated like non-persons. And this is an ongoing problem. And I just think that it's a tragedy, for me. When I think of what is going on there. I want to read a poem a friend of mine named Ronnie Joy Leah, who is a friend of ours and also an Idle No More, wrote about the children. All my children are precious. I want to go back. I want to go back before all the God, the Father religions. I want to go back to the great mother who holds all her children in her arms. How can I choose? All my children are precious to me. She weeps, and the earth weeps, tears of blood. I hear her deep sighs of sadness while the boys and girls with their guns and bombs continue to the fight to the finish. I want to go back to the great mother who holds all her children in her arms. Anyway, I want to point out 2 parallels that are really quite uncanny. One is a quote I found on the internet from the Independent Jewish Voices. It's a quote from 1940 by Joseph Weitz, and he was one of the early organizers of the Jewish National Fund, and this is 1940, before the State of Israel, before Nakba had started. So it's quite the only solution to the Palestinian situation is from the Arabs to be transferred from here. Not a single village or a single tribe, he calls them, must be left off. In 1950, the Israeli parliament, called the Knesset, passed legislation with this background in mind. Through a lot of legal wrangling and double speak and everything else, they assigned the Jewish National Fund the land, and so it's been from there on. In Canada, we had Duncan Campbell Scott in 1920 who said, "I want to get rid of the Indian problem to continue until there's not a single Indian who has not been absorbed into the body politic." So you can see the similarities, as Anthony had pointed out. Anyway, on the more positive side, there are things that are happening. Thank goodness. We have the Truth and Reconciliation. This is the last session. I am a volunteer in the Native Center here at the university, and I see the young students coming up and learning about their traditions and becoming positive people. And we have some wonderful writers who have received awards, and also Wab Canoe, who is a fantastic person, is now working with the youth in Winnipeg, inner city. And then as far as the Israel-Palestine situation is, we have our panel, which has pointed out that we're all working together towards peace and human rights. And there are nonviolent groups both here and in Israel. And in Israel, they have something called the Bereaved Family Forum, which is the families of both Israelis and Palestinian people getting together to try and do something to connect. And they also have, I have a quote from Dr. Izzaldine Abuleish, who a lot of you are familiar with. Military means have failed. A new method is necessary, non-violence. We must focus on tolerance, compromise, hope, and good deeds and saving lives. The dignity of Palestinians equals the dignity of Israelis, and it's time to live in partnership and collaboration. This is from his book, I Shall Not Hate. And lastly, I just want to say that I have 2 stones that I got from the Truth and Reconciliation, which in the Native tradition means we belong to the land. And so we are all children of the land, and so we must really work together towards that. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we have seen a lot of comment bombing happening in Facebook for this event. I don't know how many of you had a chance to actually look at the Facebook event before coming here. So let's see if we can comment bomb the Q&A. But before that, I just wanted to again remind you, this event that's happening on Tuesday, which is on April 1st, it's called Is the Analogy with the South African Apartheid Ballot. And the Faculty of Law at the University of Calgary is hosting this. Now, I want you to understand the significance of this. This is the Faculty of Law at the University of Calgary. They are hosting an event on Is the Analogy with the South African Apartheid Ballot. Now, these sort of things, just like Anthony was saying, they don't even mention this in the CBC, let alone any of the private media companies. So this is being hosted right here at the university by the Faculty of Law. So this is big. So I would really encourage you guys to go and register for this. They have booked a room which only fits 50 people. Murray Fraser Hall 3350. So I would like it if you guys go in there and just register so that you get a spot in there. It's on April 1st. At first I thought it was on April 4th. They must be doing an April Fool's thing. Are they fooling us? No. This is actually legit. Ryan called to confirm.
So it's at what time? It's at 12:15 to 1:30 p.m. So with that, we will be starting the Q&A session right now. Let us start first with, we'll take at least 2 questions together. Any questions? Right there, Wissam.
I'd like to ask, hi everyone. Just want to thank the speakers. It was amazing to hear you, though I missed the first speaker. So, I just want to ask, you mentioned that the situation in Palestine is similar to the situation in Canada here. I want to know the differences between the 2 situations. It's not exactly the same. Are both governments treating the second citizens in the same way, or how different is the treatment between both countries?
Okay, thank you. That'd probably be a good one for you to take. Is that okay? Okay. And we'll just take one more question before that. Anybody else? No? Okay. Right here? Yes.
The question is for Miriam. You mentioned like non-violent groups in Israel. I was wondering if you could talk more about like those groups.
Okay, well, you have in Israel an interesting situation where the Jewish Israelis view themselves as indigenous peoples to the territory. They've been encouraged to view themselves that way. And of course it goes back to the Old Testament. And so that settler community is in a kind of a strange psychological space where obviously the indigenous peoples, the Palestinians, were imposed upon by the group that came in after the Balfour Declaration in 1917 and after the creation of the UN, creating a principle that there should be 2 states, an Arab state and a Jewish state. And as we know, that hasn't, that second, the Arab state has never taken form. So the genesis of these settler societies is somewhat different. You also have in Canada, you know, a slower process, a process of many generations, whereas it's kind of a very accelerated in the Palestine-Israel context. You could say that you know, the heavy hand of militarism on the Palestinian population, especially in Gaza and especially in the occupied territory. Is Canada an occupied territory? It's an interesting phrase, the occupied territory. My understanding is it stays the occupied territory because if it became part of Israel, then the Palestinian population would become Israeli citizens and would outvote the Jewish population in Israel. But you know, when it comes down to certain situations, we see the heavy hand of militarism. I saw it firsthand myself. I was at Oka in 1990. I was at the Pagan Reserve in 1990 when the RCMP looked very much like a military force coming in. So you could see with Idle No More that there was a certain restraint that, you know, the Canadian government knew if they were pictured throwing tear gas at Indigenous peoples, mass arrests or something, it would be a global international story immediately. Anybody else want to take on those contrasts and comparisons? Of course, it could go on and on, but there's other folks who might want to talk.
I'm afraid I'm not so knowledgeable. This is for my ignorance with the history of the Indigenous or Native Canadians, and I'm trying to learn. So this is part of my defiance of being a settler. So I'm trying to sharing the land and knowledge, and hopefully I'm working on that. So, but I want to say that yes, I think I agree the militarization and the there is. here the reserves are kept separated from the mainstream, and I was told by a good friend of mine, I actually went to visit the reserve with him, he works on the reserve, and he told me, you know, you may be the first one who ever came here in the last 10 years. So it's true that people choose to close an eye and not to go and see for themselves, and not to learn what's going on, and not to know about the agony of people and how people suffer. I think there is less solidarity with the Native Canadians, and I would like to see more attention given to this. I think also the solidarity with the Palestinians is seeing some kind of decline because what's all happening in the Arab world after the what's so-called Arab Spring. So this is another thing that maybe more attention to what's going on, and not closing an eye of what actually happens to innocent people who are not only losing their lives and their livelihoods, but actually being forgotten by the history. So yeah, and hopefully in the next year or two, I'll be able to be more analytical about the differences and similarities by learning more. Thank you.
Okay, in regards to the question, in my time being assimilated into the school system, the white man's school system, the basis of a lot of the school fights I had were because of my history, who I am. Like I'm a full-blooded Blackfoot, and I don't know how many times I've been told it's like, where do you guys come from? Like, where are you guys at? Like we're all put on reserves. And at one point, our movements were limited. We had to have a permit to leave the reserve. But in the 60s, we were allowed to leave the reserve. So even with that, we still don't have that free. We can't just move anywhere, because if I was to go into Edmonton now and be around Edmonton, walk into a place where I normally should be at, I guess, like in the suburb, the police would be on my back in no time. The other thing is there's no justice. For instance, I'll use Brian as an example. Me and him will get into a fight. Brian would be the one that would start the fight. I would go to jail. No matter what I say, no, he started it, I'd go to jail. I'd have a fine and whatnot, I'd spend time in jail. The thing too is I used to get asked, well, where do you guys come from? And I'd say, we've always been here. And that, a lot of the kids I went to school, they couldn't grasp that, because they'd say, well, you guys are always here, how come I don't see your money? How come I don't see you guys' flag? That was something I told my parents about. I told my grandpa, how come we don't have a flag? How come we don't have our own money? He said, because that's a different system. This is our way of life. Our way of life was completely opposite to that. It wasn't material. The only way you find out if you're in a different territory, the different tribes, is with their hair or their moccasins and their clothing. Those are the differences. But back then, everyone knew, well, this is Blackfoot territory. This is Cree territory, Crow. So a lot of that is, like with what Tony mentioned. When we stand up to fight these wrongs in this country, we have guns pointed at us. And there will never be that time where I'll say, okay, well, let's sit down and let's talk about this. But still, if that happens, it's still never in our favor. That's why to this day, I always stand up. I march with non-natives. People, even in the Idle No More movement, I'm a member of the American Indian movement. And I believe in what they, I believe in what they do. And it's still very strong, although there isn't that much presence anymore. But even what they wanted to do back then, still, a lot of them got killed. for no reason, women and children. People go in their houses and kick them down. And that still happens on the reserves today. If there's something going on at a house, the cops will kick your door down. Some are curious enough to knock, but the majority of the time they'll just kick your door, walk right in. So the progression from these two periods of times, ours is like it was generations. But we're at a point right now where it's just like, we gotta get rid of you guys. We're tired of carrying you guys. And that's not true. The share of the land aspect was completely disregarded because we're supposed to share the land and live together and share the wealth. But it's not like that. Every reserve, around every reserve, there's prosperous communities. Where I come from, it's like that. You go when you drive off the reserve, it's a better highway. You know, a lot better of everything. So I see a lot of that. You know, there may be some aspects of it that are different, but I see that. But it's just a progression of time. It's just a time frame that's different.
As far as situations in the occupied territory goes, it's the same thing. The army goes into the Palestinians' home anytime they feel like it. And most of the time they haul out the men and the young boys. They have people in prisons that are minors. They have children's prisons over there. And they also have this, you know, in the same situation, if there was an Israeli and a Palestinian walking down the street and there was some problem, they would arrest the Palestinian and throw them in jail, and then they say, oh, well, you can go on, you've got citizens' right, that sort of thing. And this is the whole situation, and this is where we have to say enough. You know, you have to make people realize that that's going on. Did you want me to answer the other person's question, Simon? Yes, as far as the human rights or humanitarian organizations go, some of them are more informal than others. I was in one called Shalom Akshan, which means peace now, and it was started after 1967, strangely enough, by generals and officers in the army, and who were fed up with what the atrocities that had gone on. I didn't know for years what the atrocity was until I read the book The General's Son by Nico Pella. And the atrocity was a massacre in the refugee camp of Rafah, and where they lined up 30 people along the wall. Some of them were young boys and old men, shot them in the head, and then bulldozed them so that you wouldn't recognize them. This was blacked out, was never spoken about, and even the song, the freedom song that they would sing was suppressed for many years. They do try and get supplies into Gaza particularly. Then the other one I mentioned, the bereaved families, do try and create better understanding. And then there's B'Tselem, which is a information project. It's based in Israel, but they have people who give them information from the occupied territories, and then they have a whole network on the internet for information about what we can do. And then there's other ones like Nico Pellet spoke about training people in nonviolence, and there are actually Israelis that join in the village of benign, where they have demonstrations every Friday night against whoever, you know, the occupation. And so they join in. And then Nico Pellet is a karate teacher, and he's a high master of karate, and he goes over and teaches the Palestinian youth karate, because the philosophy behind that is non-violent, but you can overcome, and you can do better. It's within as well as you know, a whole martial arts movement. So that may be some help to you anyway.
Can I quickly just say something about these Israeli peace movements? I think they are very precious and they are very important. And one of the most amazing group, for example, B'Tselem gave cameras to Palestinians to document violations of human rights, and even the Israeli audience was shocked of what they was documented. What I want to say, and again I'm drawn to similarities rather than differences between the native Canadians and the Palestinians, the peace movement by the system is cantonized into organizations and non-for-profit rather than a movement. So it's limited in action, it's limited in space, it's limited in activities, similar to interest in the native Canadians. There are some non-for-profits who are working on the issue, but they are not a movement. And the movement, which was Idle No More, I think was the last movement which gained some popular momentum, it's shrinking back again to a smaller kind of action. So again, this is another similarity where actually the systems contain the popular support, and that's what's happening with the Israeli peace movement, and they don't dare anymore to be outspoken. One of the best groups that I would recommend really to follow now is Visualizing Palestine. It has an amazing website on and you can find very, very nice and interesting things happening, and they are up to date, and they are using infographics and films. One I really liked about unification, about marriage and love stories between the Israelis and Palestinians, or people across the borders. So yeah, there are so many, and Hamoked is one which is very interesting about house demolition. Gisha is a very interesting one about Right to Movement. So look them up, because I think they speak the truth and they try very hard to confront the mainstream system.
Thank you, Hadil. Just to add to that, in your question, you know, you asked about peace movement in Israel. How many people here have heard about Wahat al-Shalom, Nevi Shalom? Okay, one person. That's it? Seriously? Oh, and Miriam. So it's actually a peace village. It's called the Oasis of Peace village in Israel, where Arab, Palestinian of Israeli citizenship and Israelis, Jewish Israelis, they live together in one village, where the schools, they teach in both Hebrew and Arabic. They have one place of worship where both Jews and Muslims, they go together in one place. So there is, you as Calgarians, you can actually go and visit that village if you want. And there is Friends of the Oasis of Peace that hold talks all over Calgary for this, especially the Consortium for Peace Studies and the Calgary Center for Global Community. We have a whole exhibition on the Oasis of Peace if you want to know more about it. So there's that. And just in Calgary itself, you know, we try our level best to maintain those relationships. SPHR and Hillel, we always try to have as much communication as we can, but it usually happens in a more interfaith level, you know, the level of faith. But the moment we start talking about Israel-Palestine, things get a little, you know, heated up. But we still try to keep those open communication going. It's tough, but we try to do that. So yeah, so with that, let's start taking another 3 questions at least. You first. You, then Sabrina, then you over there. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, so thanks for coming and talking. It was great talks. I think it's important to kind of focus on solutions. So my question then is to both camps really is, what sort of specific actions or events need to occur to kind of rectify the situation in both countries?
Thank you. Sabrina, right there.
So, as I'm reflecting on what was said, I kind of started to draw parallels to India and how that was divided into a Hindu state and a Muslim state, and how it's kind of, to me, I see it as a cognitive difference in how people have a relationship with the land and how understand the land, and how there's tribes and they've lived together for many years without this difference understanding. And then you put the system on them of there should be two divisions, people should have borders, and that understanding of land is changed. And so, yeah, that was just one thing that I was reflecting on. It kind of led me to think about solutions and how, what happens if my brain can't handle this system and wants to get away from it, and how do I change it? Do I be radical and removed from the system completely, or do I stay within the system and try to change it, but then the system affects me? So it's this constant, I don't know, difficulty that I think a lot of our peers face too, and I would like kind of your advice and opinion on that.
Great question, Sabrina. And right there.
Thank you. This question, again, I guess is directed towards solution perhaps, but also for getting a better understanding, and I guess I'm addressing it primarily to, let's see if I can get the name right, Apisumachi? William? Yeah, so, but maybe others, perhaps Anthony Hall. With regard to the concluding process for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission here in Canada, I understand that one of the impediments to actually getting access to a lot of the truth is revolving around the federal government not releasing documents that have been requested here in Canada, particularly to do with the numbers of people in residential schools that sadly never left those schools. And so I don't know if there's any suggestions about appropriate action that like I might be able to take, or that people could take, letter writing, or of course my local MP is Rob Anders, so you never know what you're going to get when you go and talk to him. But I am wondering if, from the perspective of somebody like yourself that's really close to it, what scope there is to be able to try to get greater disclosure.
And just when you do answer these questions, I'd like you to be under a minute, if you can. So, anybody else?
Okay, to answer all the three questions, I'll answer them together. I guess the main thing that I would like to see in a lot of First Nations would like to see this government do is to reconcile the First Nations in Canada. Like right now we have the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, but I believe they need to reconcile with the First Nations in Canada based on there's that the RCAP, there's that Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, and I believe that you can acquire that online and read through that. But that states all of the, I guess it's like a history book, I guess, of the things that we've endured within this country. And aside from, the apology that was made back in 2008, that was something I just found meaningless. So from there, the apology didn't mean nothing. So a lot of this stuff it's really hard for me to accept the fact, to accept an apology from this government, because if there's an apology that's coming our way, well, what are we going to lose from that? Because that's how everything has always been. We gain victory in one area, but we lose 2 steps back. Something gets chipped off or crossed out or whatever. So the main thing that, is to get an understanding of our histories is to read the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. And the letter writing is great. We've done that. We've done the one with the murder and missing Aboriginal women, and that really went nowhere. So that's why you see us guys out on the highways, you know, showing that these things have to be done. And the strange thing about that is that's the only time you ever see First Nations in the news or on the paper. It's everything about anything they've done good, or it's just, so I'll see somebody saying on the road with a sign. So hopefully I've answered the questions.
I think the deal wanted to
I just want to say, Sabrina, is it? It's a great question, and I'm really happy that you are asking this question, because I hope I raised some concerns and provoked some thinking around this. And I don't have an immediate answer, because the answer would be different for each one of us. Sometimes systems are not rigid, systems are changeable, they are virtual, but they are affected by the group of thinking. And I think actually genuinely that liberating these systems from one dominant factor and from the white able-bodied man in general, and actually bringing more people who are true representatives of the diversity of our societies, of our thinking, of our understanding of the problems is the solution. So there's no one way for a solution. There's that's at least my understanding. If there's enough respect and understanding for the different views and actually putting them together on the table, that's liberating the negotiation process from who is leading it, leaders who are not representative of the society, actually liberating the what so-called resistance movements from their leaders, which are not representative anymore. It's going back to the real people who are affected and will influence the solution. And this, I think, applies also here in Canada as well as in Palestine and Israel.
The question of partition and this context of solutions. Partition is bad news wherever it's applied. The concept of saying this kind of person, this side of the line, this other kind of person to the other side of the line, it's always a mess. Ilan Pappy, with his one state approach, that we're past the point in Israel Palestine. What would be left for this Palestinian state? It would be like reserves. And of course, Edward Said pointed that out, with the settlements taking all the high ground, the way the roads have been done, and it's past the point. We need to imagine a new polity with equal citizenship, maybe some kind of federal relationship. In Canada, I don't like to see all these lines appearing on the map, partition approach. It seems to me the treaty approach implores us to imagine our polity, Canada, with different forms of jurisdiction. We do that with Alberta. This is Alberta, but it's at the same time Canada. The two polities somehow coexist. The Indigenous peoples polity, the First Nations polity, we have the seed of the solution in the treaties, but rather than partitioning little territories or little pieces of resources, how about we imagine, for instance, the oil and gas riches of this province or this part of the world, that a way to share jurisdiction is to say, well, some part of that richness is the Indigenous peoples. Is it 5%, 20%, 10%? We negotiate something. We get out of this situation where transfer payments go to reserves, and there's all this resentment that middle-class taxpayers say, well, I'm paying taxes and these people on reserve don't pay taxes. If we shared jurisdiction and got beyond partition, and of course they're making treaties in British Columbia, so we have an opportunity in British Columbia to try different things. Imagine the Aboriginal title to Vancouver. It's one thing to think about the Dene territory and Tom Berger up, in the Northwest Territories, but how can we express the Aboriginal title in Vancouver, for instance? How could we build that into the economics of Vancouver in some way, in some creative way? So I agree with you. Partition is bad news, and we need to find ways to share jurisdiction between different polities at the same time as we acknowledge our common shared interest beyond these other definitions, that we need to express our cultural vibrance, our differences, our linguistic differences, at the same time find ways to embrace our shared humanity, which is, by far the strongest theme of our lives.
Thank you for the answers. Sabrina, just to elaborate on your question too, personally, I feel you and I, we come from a country where the political system has been such sham that when you come here, you feel privileged to actually be in a system that at least it works for us, just coming from there. So personally, I feel like I can do a lot more if I'm working with the system. That's why I've joined a political party. That's why I try to change things through there. I know that my friend James here might disagree with me on that, but then again, that's just how we roll. With that, I would like to actually end it here. We have this room for another. We have more questions? Okay. So we have the room till 9 o'clock. So maybe we'll take a few more questions, but we will end at 9. Okay. What? You want to end 10 o'clock? Really? Okay. But we will end it formally at 9 o'clock, and then we'll go on if you have more questions. Go ahead.
Well, my question is actually quite common, so I don't think it'll take that much time to counter. So a very common rhetoric you'll hear for people who oppose the analogy or the comparison between the occupation in Palestine and the suffering of the Native Americans in Canada, a very common rhetoric would be that, well, millions of Native Americans were massacred, assimilated, forced under the most horrible conditions and abuses, whereas you don't see that severity and extremes for the Palestinians. So how would you counter that sort of simplistic way of thinking?
Okay, anybody else? Right there? Go ahead.
Hello. So hopefully my question isn't overlapping other things, but my mom is actually an Aborigine from Australia, so I think it sort of relates to the First Nation sort of issue. She's actually a HR recruitment for First Nations people to push them into like a lot more business companies, because some companies need a certain percentage of First Nation people within their business. So I was wondering, she's like so passionate about what she does, and she really feels like she's making a difference in the First Nation in the First Nation progression. But do you feel like it's sort of like segregating the First Nation people by pushing them towards this sort of system of, well, the Caucasian white man system, and that's like the only way for them to like get their word out of their oppression is through this system? Is that wrong, or is that good? Or
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay.
Actually, Simon, I have one question.
Sure.
Sorry. Okay. In my experience with organizing around the Palestinian conflict, there's one thing that I think so often gets overlooked, especially when we're talking about solution-focused approaches. Things like, organizing, sitting down and talking to each other as equals. This kind of stuff, I think, overlooks one very fundamental and core issue with that all of these colonization conflicts have in common, which is this very distinct aspect of white supremacy in all of these issues in all these places. And I'm reminded of in Israel, I think it's a little bit more clear in the Canadian example of white supremacy, although a lot of people tend to ignore the importance of this. But I think in Israel it's a lot clearer with the fact that even non-white Jews living in Israel are heavily discriminated against. You mentioned this with like Sephardic Jews. A lot of people don't know that Israel actually had a Black Panthers movement at one point, and this is within Israel. And my concern is that even if we were to resolve the technical issues, redraw the borders, rewrite the laws, if we don't address this fundamental core problem of white supremacy that's widely held, I mean, it's as a global phenomenon, not just within these areas, but if we don't address that, I don't see that the core problems are going to be resolved, and I think that could even provide the sort of rhetoric we hear now in the United States where, oh, the civil rights movement succeeded, race is no longer an issue. Well, it still is. And I don't see how in the Palestinian or Canadian cases, if we do have these sort of almost band-aid solutions, you know, how is that actually going to solve the problem, and should we be focusing on the white supremacist thing in everything we do as well?
Thank you. Would Maureen like to start this time?
Which one do I start with?
Anyone, just pick
one. Oh, well, I guess remember the last question the best. I think you made up a very valid point, because you know, there's always this supreme thing going on. I remember, you know, in South Africa, for instance, Mandela did have a victory in having the apartheid dissolved, but there's still a lot of discrimination. You know, there's still those townships and all that sort of thing. And it just seems to be a question of a lot of education and a lot of people like ourselves. Look, we're all sitting here. Why can't everybody else do that? And when we talk to each other and mix around, but that's it. You have to have examples, first of all, of whoever's doing this, and I think you're all, most of you are young people. You all have a vote, and you can find out what to vote for. And the people who are acting in those regards are the ones we don't want in our government. Same in Israel, they kept voting in all these military people, and because there's a fear factor built up, and there's nothing more discriminating than having a fear factor built up by politicians and media, when there is, you know, often there's no truth in it, or there aren't people. But you have to stand up for what we believe in, and hopefully make a change. As I say, it takes a few people to make a change, but you know, you have to work at it for a long time.
Okay, I'll answer the second question in regards to the, I guess, on our reserve we have an economic development department. And that department basically decides what's best for the tribe, what should we get into, what type of industry. But most of the time we're always in, I guess, coerced, maybe the wrong word, but we're always being pushed into the oil and gas industry. And with that created, you know, that, well, my reserve, I'll speak about the blood reserve, that created a lot of division within like our people, because the reserve we have is all we have. That's all we got. And so our chief and council allowed fracking to operate on the reserve. So we've been having some of the minor effects happening, like the minor earthquakes and toxic fumes, people getting sick. A lot of the things that we tend to get into in terms of economic development, there's a segregation aspect to it, where some people say, well, this is the betterment for our lands, our future, our children, but at what cost? And it's always our land and our territory. And right now, our chief and council, the majority of our council are all mixed bloods. So there was a question of the one prior to where, you have people having a different skin color within your own community, and that's the case as well, because, speaking from my reserve, the majority of the people that have the power, I guess, are people of mixed blood. So so you can see there's really, I don't know if you want to call that something that's not in balance. But it is true, like, there's just always, even within my community, I'd have to say that's the case too.
I try to be brief, but I think one of my problems with the current, for example, what's so-called negotiation-based process, negotiations process for Palestinian Israel is actually that people sit on the table, but they are not equal. There is a clear asymmetry of power, and there is a clear subordination of the Palestinians. So people don't come to negotiate at equal terms. And therefore, I think definitely this one will not work. This doesn't work anywhere. So if you bring people to discuss, first they need to have intelligent knowledge and sometimes alternative knowledge. They need to be informed so they can make informed decisions. And if you don't have these conditions, then it doesn't matter, because you will maintain the status quo, basically. You will maintain this manipulation of a certain power over the other. And I think this applies for the Palestinians and for the Indians and for whoever around the world, people who don't have the power versus the people who have the power. On the other issue, I think I am always in support of affirmative action. I am in support of quota as a measure for bringing justice. But I think this should be two things. Should be temporary measure, and at the same time it can't be alone. Because if you have a quota for Canadian or Native Canadians going into the forced workforce, but without changing the mindset of the people in the workforce, in the organizations, the way people treat these Canadians, Native Canadians, nothing will change, because they will always be at the bottom of the ladder. They will always be discriminated against. Projects of economic development will have environmental hazards, will actually be toxic and killing them more than integrating them into the system. So I am with affirmative actions and yes for quotas, but with other work. We have homework to do. We have, if we want to change the system, there is an reverse type of knowledge to change the way people think and actually be accepting and actually be tolerant and welcoming and able to integrate within the system.
The supremacy, well, the history of it is white supremacy, but I think we're in an era where we're seeing this tremendous surge of ruthlessness, really, of those on the top of the system. And that standing ovation as the Palestinian members of the Knesset were forced out, I felt a real resonance of supremacy. Now, we could talk about racial supremacy, but it seems to me that if you assimilate, if you accept the dominant principles of the dominant group, regardless of your background or ancestry, you will be inducted and indeed co-opted. So I think among the Palestinians or among First Nations, we're in an era where a small group are co-opted into the system, given access to the resources available, and in a sense given a license to oppress their own people. The question of Palestinian treatment compared to Native people, in a way I found that surprising, because you would look and say, well, we didn't see Native people in Canada being hit with white phosphorus in cast lead. Native people aren't forced to leave the territory like Palestinians were in 47, 48. You would think it would be, the question would be the other way around, that the maltreatment seems more extreme on Israel's side. But look at who's in prison in Canada. There's a far larger percentage of Indigenous peoples in prison in Canada than blacks in the United States, and there's a huge disproportionate number of blacks in prisons in the United States, but it's worse with Native people in Canada. And I think that to me is an expression of our Indigenous apartheid. The suicide epidemics of youth, I mean, what more powerful expression could there be that people do not find hope, they do not find decency, they do not conceive of a decent future. I mean, killing yourself, young people killing themselves in Canada, when will that lethal process end? when will we really take stock as a society and say something is terribly wrong here? And the type of colonization over generations that has taken place here, it's corrosive on people. And people end up in a position where a lot of the violence and destruction is self-inflicted. That's a terrible situation in Canada. So the question about the comparisons, is it worse? Is it better? It's a phenomena. It's a global phenomena of a supremacist group assuming they have the imperative to control the world. You know, the Toussaint Louvertures, the Tecumsehs, the people who've resisted. They often have to deal with their own oppressors within their own group. The co-opted people, the people who have been designated to oppress their own group. It's hard to hear people say in Canada, Indigenous people, you know, there was a time when it was bad enough that the, you know, Indian agent was doing it to us. But now it's our own people doing it to us, and it's very demoralizing. And the same with the Palestinians. Cooperate with the system and maybe we'll cut you a little deal. No, we need liberation. We need human solidarity, and I'm very pleased to have been able to contribute in some small way to this forum.
Ladies and gentlemen, you know, we have heard from all these four amazing panelists. We heard names like Ilan Pape, we heard names like Miko Pellet, we heard names like Dr. Isolina Blesh. We're very proud to say that we have hosted all of these people and more right here at the University of Calgary. And now we have hosted Anthony Hall, we've hosted Hadil Kazas, we've hosted William Singer and Miriam Mayer. Thank you guys. Thank you very much. Where is Ala? Okay, Ala is here to present our speakers with little tokens of appreciation. Okay, we can start from there.
Thank you very much for coming.
Okay, so they're all kafiyas as a symbol of appreciation. So, thank you guys. Again, stick around, ask us questions, or drive home safe, take the transit. Thank you.
We couldn't have put together a better team. I'm happy when I see the person.
I'm so glad you actually came and said, because that's another thing I forgot to tell us. Let us know how it went, because when I hear stuff, I'll understand how it went. So, okay. Without the diversity of this.
Final question I wanted to lay out to everyone, but we're out of time. George Gallows, you know that guy? Yeah. I watched a clip that puzzled me 2 days ago, and it's still puzzling me to this day. I'm thinking, I'm looking for an answer. Someone asked them that, hey, why are Americans, why are the British, and why are the Iranians, this and that, interfering in our business, stopping us from so and so and so, or not?